What you are seeing before your eyes today, at this very moment, is not just another war in the Middle East, it is the beginning of something that no textbook has yet been able to explain, because it is happening right now. While you are here, while oil prices rise, markets tremble, and members of Congress in Washington look at each other without a clear answer. What is happening between Iran and the United States is one of those crises that future historians will study for decades, and we, you and I, have the privilege and the burden of living through it in real time. What worries me, what seems deeply revealing, is that no one in the halls of power is being completely honest about what this means for the future of the world's most powerful superpower. There is something the major media does not say clearly. The United States entered this conflict without an exit strategy, without a definitive plan for victory, and now finds itself trapped at a crossroads that could redefine its global position for generations. Let's talk about this with the seriousness it deserves. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched joint strikes against Iran in an operation called Epic Fury, carrying out nearly 900 attacks in the first 12 hours. 900. Think about that. This is not a skirmish or a surgical response. It is full-scale war. And what is extraordinary is how we got here. This did not begin on February 28th. It is the result of decades of accumulated decisions and strategic mistakes. Back in 2018, the United States withdrew from the nuclear agreement known as the JCPOA and reimposed sanctions on Iran, shifting toward force instead of diplomacy. That decision, presented as strength at the time, had consequences we are now paying for. When you remove a country from a diplomatic agreement without offering a viable alternative, you push it toward radicalization. That is exactly what happened. Iran enriched uranium, developed missile capabilities, and built a regional network of proxies across Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria. Sanctions, when applied massively and over long periods, do not bend nations. They harden them. They do not destroy governments, they damage populations, and governments that survive sanctions become more resilient. By October 2025, the World Bank projected Iran's economy would contract, with inflation reaching around 60%. That means ordinary Iranians saw their savings evaporate and prices skyrocket. In such conditions, people either rise against their government or unite with it against an external enemy. In Iran, both happened simultaneously. In late December 2025, massive protests erupted across Iran. Millions took to the streets, the largest movement since the Islamic Revolution. But instead of diplomacy, there was brutal repression. At least 30,000 people were killed, according to Iranian officials. That massacre convinced Washington that military action was inevitable. But inevitable for whom? Reports suggest that Saudi Arabia's crown prince urged U.S. leadership to strike Iran, alongside pressure from Israel. This raises a critical point. The most powerful country in the world made a war decision partly under pressure from regional allies. That is not global leadership. It is outsourced foreign policy. The economic consequences are severe. Rising energy prices are driving global inflation. Europe faces another energy crisis, worsened by disruptions in gas supply and instability in the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's oil flows. When that choke point is threatened, the entire global economy feels it. Production slows, supply chains break, and everyday people pay the price. There is also a revealing contradiction. Even amid war, U.S. officials considered allowing Iranian oil to enter global markets to stabilize prices. This highlights a fundamental truth. Economic interests often override ideology. Meanwhile, even weeks into the conflict, U.S. leadership lacks a clear strategy or exit plan. History shows a pattern in such situations. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, military power destroys effectively, but struggles to build lasting peace. Iran, despite being weakened, remains a formidable adversary. Large population, difficult terrain, and extensive regional networks. This could become a prolonged conflict. Possible outcomes include a decisive U.S. victory, unlikely, a prolonged stalemate, most likely, a wider regional or global escalation, most dangerous. There are already signs of escalation across multiple regions, raising the risk of miscalculation. One wrong move could spiral into a much larger conflict. There are also nuclear risks. Attacks near nuclear facilities could trigger a radiological disaster affecting the entire world. Globally, this conflict reflects a shifting power structure. Countries like China and Russia are watching closely. The message being sent may actually encourage nuclear proliferation, not prevent it. Even pauses in fighting suggest that negotiation remains necessary. Power is not just the ability to destroy, it is also the ability to negotiate. This moment reflects what might be called the superpower trap, the need to constantly assert dominance, which creates cycles of conflict and resistance that eventually weaken the power itself. What is happening in Iran is not just a regional crisis, it is a reflection of the current state of global power and the pressures on U.S. leadership. The outcome of decisions made in the coming months could shape the global order for decades. For everyday people, especially working class and immigrant communities, this is not abstract. It affects prices, jobs, and lives directly. That is why it is important to stay informed, question narratives, and think critically. Reality is complex, and understanding it requires rejecting simple explanations. The future of this crisis is still being written. Rewritten version. Clear, engaging, and more powerful. What we're witnessing right now isn't just another Middle East conflict. It's the opening chapter of a crisis that will likely define global politics for decades, and it's unfolding in real time. Oil prices are rising, markets are shaking, policymakers are scrambling for answers they don't yet have, and behind closed doors, there's a level of uncertainty that isn't being fully admitted publicly. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. The United States entered this conflict without a clear endgame. The February 28, 2026 strikes, nearly 900 in just 12 hours, weren't a warning shot. They were a declaration of full-scale war. But this moment didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of years, decades, of decisions stacking up. When the U.S. withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 and reimposed sanctions, it chose pressure over diplomacy. But pressure doesn't always produce submission. Sometimes it produces resistance. Iran adapted. It strengthened its military capabilities, expanded its regional influence, and hardened internally under economic strain. Sanctions didn't break the system. They reshaped it. By 2025, ordinary Iranians were facing crushing inflation and economic collapse. Protests erupted across the country, but instead of opening a path for diplomacy, the situation escalated, internally and externally. And then came the turning point. Mass repression, thousands dead, and a shift in Washington toward military action. But here's the deeper question. Was war truly inevitable, or was it pushed into existence? Reports suggest strong pressure from regional allies helped shape the decision. If true, that raises serious questions about who is really steering global strategy. Meanwhile, the economic shockwaves are already spreading. Energy prices are climbing, global inflation is rising, and critical trade routes like the Strait of Hormuz are under threat. When that artery tightens, the entire world economy feels it. And here lies a striking contradiction. Even during active conflict, policymakers are considering allowing Iranian oil back into the market to stabilize prices. War on one hand, economic dependence on the other. This is the reality of modern power, driven as much by markets as by military force. But the biggest concern isn't just the present, it's what comes next. History offers a warning. The U.S. has entered conflicts before without clear exit strategies, and the results have often been long, costly, and inconclusive. Iran is not an easy opponent. Even weakened, it has the capacity to sustain a prolonged conflict through geography, population, and regional alliances. So what are the possible outcomes? A quick, decisive victory? Unlikely. A drawn-out conflict that drains resources and stability? Much more plausible. Or a broader escalation, one sparked not by intent, but by miscalculation. That's the real danger. Because once conflicts spread across multiple regions, control becomes fragile. One mistake, a missile off course, a misread signal, can trigger something far bigger than anyone intended. There's also a risk that goes beyond war itself: nuclear infrastructure. Any serious damage could lead to consequences that don't respect borders. And globally, the message being sent is clear. Other powers are watching and learning. If anything, this kind of conflict may encourage more countries to seek deterrence, not less. At its core, this moment reveals something deeper: the burden of being a superpower. A superpower must constantly prove its strength. But every show of force creates new resistance, new complications, and new risks. Over time, that cycle can erode even the strongest nations. This isn't just a regional crisis, it's a stress test for the current global order. And the outcome isn't predetermined. It will depend on decisions still being made right now, which is why understanding this moment matters, not through simplified narratives, but through careful, critical thinking. Because history isn't just something we study later, it's something we're living through now.